Hello and welcome to the White House 1600 Sessions. I'm Stuart McLaurin, President of the White House Historical Association. In this episode, we have a truly extraordinary tale of what could have been a forgotten footnote in history. When President John F. Kennedy was assassinated on November 22, 1963, Mrs. Kennedy found the incredible strength, fortitude, and poise to show the nation how to grieve. While many people believed that the president would be laid to rest in his home state of Massachusetts, Mrs. Kennedy instead wanted her husband's gravesite to be accessible to the greater public. So she decided he should be at Arlington National Cemetery. It was there only 3 days later that President Kennedy was buried. In this episode, I sit down with James Felder, who was by President Kennedy's side from the moment the president's body arrived at Andrews Air Force Base until the moment he was interred. As a young Army sergeant, Felder was the head honor guard at President Kennedy's funeral. He is now a revered civil rights activist, lawyer, lecturer, a truly great American. He is a former South Carolina legislator and steward of the African American Methodist Church in Sumter, South Carolina. And we're truly honored to share his story. Then we'll meet a dear friend of mine, Lady Crane, the head volunteer of No Other Volunteers, as she likes to say, at Oak Spring Garden Foundation. We return to the gorgeous grounds of Upperville, Virginia, to what was the estate of American philanthropist Paul Mellon and Rachel Lambert Mellon. Mrs. Mellon, known by her nickname Bunny, had a very close relationship with President and Mrs. Kennedy. You may recall the president asked her to redesign the White House Rose Garden, and we spoke with Mrs. Mellon's grandson and great friend of the White House Historical Association, Thomas Lloyd, for that episode. I hope you check it out if you haven't already. Well, Mrs. Mellon was known for her exquisite style, gardens, and her passion for landscape design. These passions were brought together in her rare book library. Most importantly, she was a trusted friend of First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy. Mrs. Kennedy actually requested that Mrs. Mellon collaborated on the design of the landscape at the president's permanent gravesite in Arlington, as well as the grounds of the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library and Museum in Boston. Generations later, it's easy to forget that where President Kennedy rests today in Arlington National Cemetery is actually about 20 feet from his initial burial location of November 1963. The site was moved in 1967 to accommodate the millions of visitors. Eleanor will tell us how she and her colleague, Nancy Collins, learned of a top secret project, a sculpture created for President John F. Kennedy's permanent gravesite that was completed, but as we know, was never installed at Arlington National Cemetery. That sculpture was designed to represent the wreath that adorned President Kennedy's initial grave, including the hats left behind by the honor guard. We're excited to bring you a special look at pieces of that sculpture a little later on. They're located at the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library and Museum as part of their library collection, although they are not on display for public view. And while we don't have a definitive answer as to why the sculpture was never installed at the permanent gravesite, we do recognize and honor what the artwork represents. Here now is our conversation with retired Army Sergeant James Felder. Mr. Felder, what an honor to be with you today. And you are part of American history and White House history, and to be in your presence as you had that front row seat to history in November of 1963 is quite an honor.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for those kind words.
Let's go back and talk about what got you to this point. You grew up in South Carolina. what led you to join the Army, and then what took you to this role at Arlington National Cemetery? That in and of itself is a great honor. Had you not served the president's funeral, these thousands of funerals of great American heroes had to be an honor in itself.
And it was. But I came up during the era of the draft. As long as I was in college, I got the deferments. But the minute I graduated, my local draft board was looking for me. So each county had a selective service office, and they had quotas to fill. So I graduate from college, and I think I got my life in order. I planned to get married and all of that. And then I get this brown envelope from the selective service system saying that you need to report to Fort Jackson, South Carolina for training. I ran to see my senator, Strom Thurmond.
Oh, yes.
I went to see my congressman, John J. Riley, at the time. Both of them said the same thing to me. Well, boy, we can't help you. Once you get that brown envelope, you got to report. So I went kicking and screaming to Fort Jackson, South Carolina. Stayed there 6 months, basic training, AIT, leadership school. And then one afternoon, the old first sergeant fell out the whole battalion of men. Said, all right, they want some of y'all to come up to Washington and try out for the honor guard. He started barking out the requirements. If you're more than 6'4", get out the formation. If you're less than 5'10", get out the formation. If you wear glasses, get out the formation. If you didn't average 90 on your battery test, get out the formation. If you ever had any encounter with law enforcement, even a speeding ticket, get out the formation. When he finished, out of 1,000 men, there were only 10 of us.
And there you were.
There I was.
Wow.
They shipped us up to Washington, Pullman train, met Union Station, took us over to Fort Myer. They were very nice to us initially, but the minute we got to Fort Myer, they started cussing and threatened to beat our behinds and everything. I thought I was pledging the fraternity all over again. After 2 weeks, the old first sergeant said, all right, you 10 guys, come out here behind the barracks. We did. Felder, yes, Sergeant. Klontz, kid from Baltimore, yes, Sergeant. Get out the formation. Well, we thought we didn't make it. All right, you other 8 guys, pick up your duffel bag. You're going to Vietnam.
Whoa.
So that's how close I came to going to Vietnam.
Wow.
So now I'm assigned to one of the units. Honor Guard is made up of 4 units. I was assigned to the casket bearer units, and that's where I stayed my entire time at Fort Myer, burying the dead in Arlington Cemetery. First funeral was Medgar Evers, the head of the NAACP in Mississippi. He was assassinated the same night that Kennedy went on national television and spoke about civil rights and offered some civil rights legislation to the Congress. Midnight after Kennedy's speech, Medgar Evers was gunned down in his front yard with his wife and family looking on. They brought the body to Washington after service in Jackson, Mississippi. We buried him. I escorted Miss Evers and the children to the White House where they had a repast for her. That was the beginning of my burying the dead in Arlington.
The Medgar Evers funeral was your first funeral as an Honor Guard member.
That is correct.
Wow, that is so powerful.
Yeah.
As a young Black sergeant in the military, you were one of the earliest to be integrated into the military and to be in such a role.
That is correct. Truman really desegregated the military. In 1948, he issued an executive order that integrated the military. So by 1963, it was kind of fashionable now for Blacks to be promoted. The problem before was white soldiers did not want to be headed by Black officers. Well, Truman solved that problem, but it was still a problem because Eisenhower didn't support that. Now, he's now president, but he didn't support early on integrating of the military services. So that happened. Now, when I got to D.C., Kennedy, before I got there, on Inauguration Day, he's sitting in a reviewing stand, and the Honor Guard passes. And there are no Blacks in the Honor Guard. He said to General Wheeler, who's military director of Washington General at the time, he said, I don't want to see that unit again until you get some Blacks in that unit. That was the beginning of it. I was the 10th to be assigned to the unit, and I stayed there until I got out.
Well, let's go back. You are a young sergeant in the U.S. Army. How in the world did your youthful career take you to that moment in time where you became the head of the Honor Guard for the funeral of the President of the United States?
I joined the Army at age 21, right out of college. And I stayed in a total of 6 years serving the selective service requirement, with 2 years of active duty, 2 years of inactive duty, and then 2 years of just reserve. But when Kennedy was assassinated, I was 23 years old at the time. I had done over 1,100 funerals at Arlington Cemetery in an 18-month period, risen to the rank of sergeant, and I was the senior NCO for funerals at Arlington. I was on leave that Friday afternoon because I had not planned to make the military my career. So
You were literally counting the days to leaving the Army.
Oh, yeah. Short time of 57 days. I'm getting ready to get out of here. So I'm out looking for a job. Walked out of the Department of Agriculture, and there were these ladies standing around this taxi crying. Nosed at me, went over, asked the cab driver, what's going on? He said, they just shot Kennedy. I said, what do you mean they shot Kennedy? He's in Dallas today. If you're in the military, you always know where the president was.
Yes.
Yeah, that's where they got it, in Dallas. I was waiting for my wife to get off from work. She was a librarian at the Federal Power Commission, and we were going to head home to Sumter, South Carolina for Thanksgiving holidays. So I rode around. I lived off post. I rode around D.C. for a while. Finally, Walter Cronkite came on and said, the president is dead. Went home to my apartment. Telephone was ringing. It was the first sergeant. He said, Sergeant Felder, your leave has been canceled. You need to get out here to Fort Myer and get your team together. They'll go to Dallas to pick up the president's body. Friday afternoon, all kind of traffic and all that. By the time I could get to Fort Myer and get a team together, Lyndon Johnson was winging his way back to D.C. He didn't know what was going on. The president's dead. Governor Connally had been shot. So he wanted to get out of Dallas. And if you remember, he took the oath of office on Air Force One.
Yes,
with
yes.
Kennedy standing by his side. So we went out to Andrews Air Force Base and waited on the tarmac. Finally, Air Force One touched down around 6:30, 7 o'clock in the evening. We took the body off. At first, we were going to fly it by helicopter to Bethesda Naval Hospital, but couldn't get the casket in the little helicopter, so they took it over land in a gray Navy ambulance. Miss Kennedy was in it, so was Robert Kennedy, and I think someone else. So we met them at Bethesda, took it out, took it into the morgue room, and that's where things began to happen.
So the president's body arrives from Andrews Air Force Base at Bethesda Naval Hospital.
Yes.
And you are there with your team to receive the body, and it barely leaves your sight for the next several days. Take us through that progression, and I want to talk with you about the process, and then I want to talk with you about the feelings and the meanings of that.
First, we thought the body would be taken to Walter Reed Hospital, but that's an Army hospital. Some old Navy admirals said, no, Kennedy was Navy, take him to Bethesda. So that's how we ended up at Bethesda Naval Hospital. We took the body out of the ambulance and took it into the morgue room, where they began the autopsy, which lasted for 6 hours.
Now, are you dressed in your formal military?
Dressed in formal military attire at that point. Doug Mayfield was the other Army guy. So on the team, there was a 6-man team to begin with, which is normal. But later on, because of the weight of the second casket, we had to add 2 more military people to it.
Sure.
And because it was a president's funeral, you had to have a joint honor guard team.
Of course.
Each branch of the service has their own honor guards, and they're all buried people in Arlington Cemetery. But that particular day, what had happened was, prior to Kennedy's death, we had rehearsed for a presidential funeral. President Hoover had gotten ill in October of 1963. We had not had a presidential funeral since Franklin Roosevelt. So the Army and the other branches of service thought it was proper if we plan and prepare.
Of course.
A team of us went into New York, where Hoover was, to recon the place and be prepared. Well, Hoover got better and went home. Next thing we know, 3 weeks later, Kennedy is assassinated. And did the theorists, the conspiracy theory had a field day on it. They said, they knew he was going to be killed because they'd already practiced for a funeral. But it was Hoover's funeral we had practiced for. So that's how.
So conspiracy theories are not a new thing. They've gone back a long time.
Correct. So we're in the morgue It took so long because in those days they didn't have the equipment today in terms of x-rays and so forth. They kept taking x-rays, have to take them out and have them printed out and come back. So it lasted for 6 hours from 8 o'clock until 2 a.m. in the morning. I never witnessed an autopsy. Now, I worked at a funeral home. I've seen dead bodies, but not an autopsy. And one that took so long, 2 o'clock in the morning, the pathologist said, that's it. What they were looking for was fragments from the second bullet. He was shot twice. They couldn't find it. So finally, that's it. Now, it would have been much easier to take the body right down Wisconsin Avenue to Gall's funeral home.
Yes.
Miss Kennedy would not let the body leave the hospital. At midnight, she sent Larry O'Brien, Powell, and O'Donnell out to get a new casket.
The casket, there was an original casket that came from Dallas on the plane. Yeah. And then your colleagues went down to Gawler's and selected the large, heavy casket. And so there were two caskets involved in this process.
The first one was just a bronze casket out of, I can't remember the name of the funeral home there, out of Dallas. And a handle got broken on it in transporting it. And so when I noticed that, I went to my company commander. I said, listen, we're not going to be able to move this body all around D.C. with this broken handle on it. And that's when they sent word to Miss Kennedy. She was upstairs on the 16th floor of the hospital. We got to get a new casket. And that's when she told O'Brien, who later became NBA commissioner, Dave Powers. Yeah. That O'Brien, yes. Dave Powers, who swam with Kennedy every day.
Yes.
And then there was O'Donnell. They were three that went out to get this new casket at midnight with no instructions. They walked into Gawler's funeral home. They have no instruction of what to get or what to look for. And they see this huge African mahogany casket. And they said, that one. It weighed 1,000 pounds.
Oh, my goodness.
They brought it back to the hospital.
And was there talk of what would happen with the first casket, where it would go? And what?
Later on, that casket they shot holes into it, and they took it out into the Atlantic Ocean, put cement in it, and it's somewhere at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean now.
Wow.
Yeah.
Were you involved with the physical movement of the body from one casket to another?
I was.
Wow, that had to be very emotional.
It was. And because of the condition of the body, particularly his head, the embalmers did a masterful job. I mean, his head was just, torn asunder, I guess you would say. But they restored it. And he was viewable. But Miss Kennedy said, no, we're not going to have an open casket.
So she never saw the body until you were at the White House.
That is correct. She looked in the casket, and she said he looked so wax-like. Then she cut a lock of hair from his head, and she put her ring in the casket. And she said, we're not going to have an open casket. And that was it. So it closed in the White House, and it was never open again.
And then the casket stayed in the East Room of the White House.
Overnight.
And you remained?
I remained there.
On duty there.
That was an interesting time. The next day, which was Saturday, heads of states from all over the world started coming in. And I'm standing there, and here comes George Wallace and Earl Warren.
My goodness.
Chief Justice, two men who did not like each other.
That's right, no.
Walking in. Wow. The other pair was Haile Selassie and
Interesting.
de Gaulle.
Yes.
De Gaulle, both of them were in full military attire. De Gaulle stood 6'4", Haile Selassie about 5'5". Mutt and Jeff, if you remember that cartoon.
Yes.
So you're standing there, you're watching all of that go by. You're really observing history, I guess. And that went on all day Saturday during the day. Saturday night, we went out to Arlington Cemetery to practice. We had this heavy casket. The steps at the bottom of the tomb of the unknown soldier are identical to the steps at the Capitol.
Oh, interesting.
So we couldn't go over to the Capitol to do it, so we went to Arlington. Now, there are no lights in the cemetery, so we had to have candles out there practicing taking this dummy casket that we put sandbags in, and we set two guys on top of it to get the weight.
Actual weight. Wow.
So we worked that until about 1 o'clock before we finally called it quits, because our fear going up, you got to keep the casket level when you're moving it. Going up is not so bad because the guys on the rear, they can almost put it up on their shoulder. But coming down, these guys on the back got to be leaning way down there to keep it level. So we practiced and practiced until we thought we had it right. And then we didn't have any mistakes.
Several days pass, and did you sleep at all during that time?
I was able to go home for 4 hours. And this was after the practicing at Arlington Cemetery of going up the steps. I was on a high of some sort. Adrenaline was flowing. All I'm worried about is the next step we have to, and be sure the guys are in tune with it. So afterwards, I must have slept 2 days, I guess.
So during those times when you would leave to go to rehearse at Arlington and have the 4 hours at home, did you have a relief there in the honor guard?
Yes, we did. We called it the guards. There was one at each end of the casket for the entire 4 days, and they would change the guard every 2 hours. 4 would stand there to do it. So that was a break for them. Yeah, the casket was never left alone. That's your question. It was never left alone. Yeah.
So the body, the casket, is moved from the White House up to the Capitol,
Right.
And you're prepared and ready to take it up those stairs.
Yep.
And I believe he would lie in state for 20 hours or so there in the rotunda.
The rotunda was supposed to close at 11 o'clock, but at 11 p.m., there were people all the way back to D.C. Stadium at that point, standing 4 abreast and it moving slowly through it. So it kept it open all night because of that, yeah.
And were you in the rotunda when Mrs. Kennedy came to visit the casket?
Yes, I was there.
Tell us about that moment.
It was a moving moment. She went to the bier, or the catafalque, and Caroline joined her also, where she put her hand under the flag to touch the casket and said a small prayer and then left. But that was other moving moment as well, to watch that.
And from there, you go to St. Matthew's Cathedral, where the
yes,
funeral mass is held.
Correct. We took our bus ahead of the caisson so that we could get there and check the church out, see if they didn't put chairs in the way in the aisles and all of that. So that worked out. We only had about that much space to turn the casket around.
So the funeral mass takes place, and of course it's processed with the delegation from all over the world behind the casket with Mrs. Kennedy. And there was, I believe, the Secret Service advised them against walking all those world leaders exposed, and yet she insisted that this is how they go. And then from there, across the Memorial Bridge to Arlington Cemetery, to the first grave site, the initial grave site. Tell us about that process and your memories of being in that most powerful of American memorial spaces, honoring our veterans going back to the Civil War.
We came out of the church and we flipped the flag back for Cotton Cushion to do the final rites. And we looked over there and there was little John, 3 years old. It was his birthday. And all of a sudden, he just did a salute. And I mean, that just took a lot. I'll never forget that day.
And that's an image that went around the world. And it's one of the most iconic memories of that day.
Yeah. Now, here's the problem of getting to the cemetery. Heads of states and others were in their limousines. And after the church service was over, limousines were scattered all over the place. So in some limousine, you'd have 8 people, and some you only have 1 person. And there was this long line of limousines all the way across Memorial Bridge. Now, we're walking beside the caisson, and the horses were moving at a real good clip. I mean, they were moving. So we get the grave site, and we got to go up this incline. And this casket is getting heavier with each step. In front of us is the clergy. It's the rabbi, Protestant, and Catholic priest. So they're walking up the hill like they had no place to go. And this casket is getting heavier and heavier and heavier. So I look at Jerry Smith, the young Marine across from me. I said, Jerry, let's nudge these guys with this casket. So one of them looked back and said, can you step it up? This casket is heavy. And they started moving.
That's great. That's great. Well, the stage there is so incredible, looking back across the city of Washington,
Yep.
the Custis Lee Mansion up above you. There's the flyover and the 21 gun salute, the flag folding ceremony. Now, were you part of the
If you look at some of
flag
the old
folding
pictures,
ceremony?
I'm the last one with the flag because I've got to check it to be sure no red is showing. So when I check it to be sure no red is flowing, then I passed it over to the cemetery director, and then he passed it on to Miss Kennedy. That's how that worked. Now, you mentioned Custis Lee Mansion. Where President Kennedy is buried, there was not supposed to be any burial sites in front of the Custis Lee Mansion. He had been out there early in November for Veterans Day, and he stood at the Custis Lee Mansion and looked over the Potomac at Washington. And he said, I could stay out here forever.
Wow.
And that's what made Miss Kennedy decide to bury him there. Now, the people back in Boston, they didn't like it. They wanted him to come home. But she said, no, this is my show. And that's how he ended up with, if you notice, there are no other burial sites around it at all. Because that's supposed to be hallowed ground in front of the Custis Lee Mansion.
What a prophetic sentiment that he expressed about that space.
Yeah.
And then he's been interred there, and the millions of people who have visited since. So a key part to our story in what we're talking about today is the memorial that was never realized around the president's final gravesite. And a piece of that was iconic to what you and your honor guard did that day with your covers. Tell us about that.
It was not planned. We're standing there at gravesite and everybody else was scattered. Doug Mayfield from San Diego, California, took his hat off and threw it on the site. And the rest of us just did the same thing. Now, when we got back to the barracks, we got chewed out. First sergeant said, where are your hats? You in dress, you know, we're gonna gig you for that. Then he said, you know that those hats are government property? We're gonna have to charge you for that. Oh, no. Well, what do we care? What do we? But that's how it happened.
Yeah. And so those were left there. And the visual of that in my mind's eye is just so compelling, with each of the services represented right there around the president's gravesite. So when you remove your hat and you toss it down, each of the services have a different uniform and a different hat. So there's this array of different hats. Describe your Army hat to us. What does it look like?
My Army hat, it's blue with on the top of it, sort of whirling figure.
Yes, in gold.
That's it. Blue. Of course, you know, the Navy guys wore the white caps.
Yes.
And the Marine cap is similar to the Army. People oftentimes compared me, they thought I was a Marine because the dress uniforms look so much alike, you know.
Yeah.
But the hat, that's how it was described.
Did you grab another cover to then go to the White House?
Yes. Yes, that's have come and go to the White House. Yes.
And then what was that? There was a reception at the White House following the burial.
It was, a lot of people were there. The other duty of the honor guard is to provide orderlies at the White House. If you notice at the White House, whenever the president's out, either there are two Marines standing there in dress uniform or two Army guys in dress uniform. So we had to get another hat to go over to the White House. So that part, because you borrowed one from your buddy to take care of that. And I didn't give it any more thought until here in recent years about those hats. Didn't know what happened to them. Yes.
After the funeral passed and you're sort of moving on and you only had 57 days left in the Army, did you hear any word of appreciation or thank you from Mrs. Kennedy after that?
First she called.
Wow.
She called. And then she developed a book of photos. And it's a step-by-step still shots from the time we picked the body up at Andrews Air Force Base right up until we buried it in Arlington Cemetery. So that I have in remembrance.
Wow, what a special thing. And how did that telephone call come? Did the White House put through a call from the First Lady?
White House found me, yes. The White House found me. Because by that time, I was out of the military. I was out of the military, but they found me. And apparently gave it that way, and I got the call. Soft voice, quiet. No, she was only 32 years old. You know, and she changed the White House. They were doing the twists in the White House and all of that and so forth.
What a wonderful life and a career, and just your service to our country in the Army and serving the state legislature and doing these wonderful things, but the front row seat to history that you had that week is something that is just unimaginable. And I can only think that it must be something that never really leaves your mind.
It never does, but what impressed me most was I brought my grandsons up to Arlington. In the visitor center, on one of the murals, was a huge picture of my team and them. I didn't tell them what was going on, so we're walking around the place, and one of them looked up. He said, "Papa, that's you, that's you." That was the most exciting moment for me to all of this thing.
Wow. Wow. And now we're talking about this memorial that was made,
Yeah.
but never used, that incorporates your hat, your military cap,
Yep.
immortalized in this sculpture. And as we tell the rest of this story about it being lost and found, it's wonderful to have this opportunity with you to reconnect to your story, your contribution to American history and White House history, and being in that intimate role with the president and certainly with Mrs. Kennedy in her most grievous and difficult hour. So thank you for sharing this with us.
Thank you for recognizing it. Thank you for doing what you're doing with it.
Well, you are an inspiration not only to your grandkids, but to me and to everyone who will watch this. And you're sharing a bit of White House history that I did not know and that our viewers will learn. So thank you so much.
Surely, my pleasure.
After that wonderful conversation with Jim Felder, we are now joined by Eleanor Crane. Eleanor is the head volunteer here at Oak Spring Garden Foundation. I guess the only volunteer here at Oak Spring Garden Foundation. Your husband, Peter, is the president of the foundation, and you have both been wonderful friends to the White House Historical Association over the years as we've unpacked and shared so many stories about Mrs. Mellon and Mrs. Kennedy and their relationship and their legacy. And as we continue talking about this lost memory of history and this very special item that could have been but never was, we're here in this gallery to share more optics about that story and would love to have you share those with us.
Thank you, Stuart. It's our pleasure. It began during the pandemic. I was cleaning the graves up at the Fletcher Cemetery that we'll see shortly. And a stonemason, Tommy Reed, came up one day to deliver water for cleaning the gravestone. And he mentioned that there was a maquette of the JFK grave up in the cemetery that he made in 1973. And it didn't make any sense to me why there would be a maquette of the JFK grave in 1973, 6 years after the reinternment and 10 years after his original burial. So that began our search into why Mrs. Mellon would have made such a thing in 1973.
So when we talked to Mr. Felder, he described to us leaving his hat with others around the original grave site. And this image depicts that. I've never seen this before. Describe this to us.
Well, not many people remember that Arlington Cemetery was chosen by Mrs. Kennedy on the Saturday after the president died. He was supposed to be placed with his children in Boston. And on the Saturday, he was killed on the Friday. On the Saturday, Mrs. Kennedy said he should be left for the nation in Arlington. So they had to quickly put this grave site together, and they knew it was going to be temporary. Late on the Saturday, Arlington heard that she wanted an eternal flame, and they had to get it together for the Monday burial. So when the burial happens, the eternal flame is lit, and the family and the dignitaries leave the grave site, where the president is then buried with the dirt on top, and then the eternal flame is placed. And that's when Mr. Felder and his comrades leave their hat. And this is Mr. Felder's hat there on the cemetery. The very next day, Mrs. Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy come back to the cemetery. because they had not seen the hats. They had left to go back to the White House. And Bobby sees the hats on the grave and turns to Mrs. Kennedy and says, "Leave them there until they crumble." So it was very important, in particular to Bobby and for Mrs. Kennedy too. She heard those words and she wanted that to happen too. They put the white picket fence around it, and it left it there until the reinterment in March of 1967. I was there in 1965, and I remember the white picket fence as a little girl. I was 4.5 years old, but I remember coming up there.
So having heard Mr. Felder share about leaving his cover there on the original gravesite and describing the hat to us, to see it now depicted here in this image is so compelling. How does this tee up what we're talking about today in the actual sculpture?
Well, when the stonemason came to me and described this sculpture up at the Fletcher Cemetery, he kept on saying there were hats, there were there were helmets. And I was trying to picture why there would be helmets up at the Kennedy grave. And so the hats actually became the clue to unravel this mystery and what it looked like and where it was. And so Mr. Felder's hat, which at the time we didn't know about, became so iconic to us because it is the most visible on the grave when you follow his hat over time.
Eleanor and her colleague Nancy Collins searched through their archives to find anything about Mrs. Mellon. The stone maquette, the gravesite mock-up, found here on the property in the old cemetery, and a memorial sculpture for President Kennedy that includes hats. They put together this temporary exhibit at Oak Spring Garden Foundation, which summarizes what they learned.
Yeah, we'll start here, the burial of the president, and then Bobby Kennedy and Jackie Kennedy going back with the architect John Warneke to the grave the day after the burial, and beginning the plans for the new grave, which is going to take years to accomplish. They have a plan, and they actually present it to the people in 1964, at the end of 1964, of what the plan is going to look like. So the critics can have their comments and people can have their comments. Mrs. Mellon is asked to be a part of this in March of 64. So she's there very early on, helping mainly with the landscaping, but then afterwards she gets more involved. The hats, we're going back to the hats because we think in 1966, Jean Schlumberger, the jewelry designer from Tiffany, is asked by Mrs. Mellon to begin the process of planning to memorializing those caps. There's a letter here from Schlumberger to Mrs. Mellon in 66 saying, "Your idea was so exciting that night. I cannot thank you enough for your guiding hand, which is leading me further and further." They think it's a very top secret project. They write in sort of code throughout their letters because they don't want anyone to know what they're doing. But then 6 months before the reinterment, Mrs. Mellon gets very involved, so much so that she picks out the pink granite stone that you see up at the grave today. She finds it in Cape Cod. She brings it down here to Oak Spring. Her stonemasons lay it out, and they hand carve each of the stones to the design that she wants. If you go up to the grave, you'll see, as you go up the stairs, you'll see this wavy feeling of the grave, and it's supposed to be the sea, and that's what she wanted. She finds the round stone where the eternal flame is going to come up, and that's all here at Oak Spring. The night Jackie Kennedy and Mrs. Mellon, they're in Antigua, Mrs. Mellon's house in Antigua, and Schlumberger does not want to be there when the drawing for this wreath around the eternal flame is presented, and so Mrs. Mellon has the drawing and presents it to Jackie Kennedy, who looks at it for ages and says, "It's beautiful." And she writes to Schlumberger and says, "We're going to commission this piece. It's a beautiful drawing, and now let's get it done." And that involved getting a maquette, approving the maquette in plaster, sending it down to be bronzed. And so once they have the drawing and people approve it, and you can see Mr. Felder's hat is right here. It's always present. The reinterment takes place March 15th, 1967. And now they need someone to actually make the wreath. They need a sculptor. And Schlumberger has the best sculptor in town, and his name is Louis Ferrand. Louis is a Frenchman, just like Schlumberger. They've worked together for many years, and he's the best person for this job. He's living up in New Hampshire. He has a studio up there. He gets commissioned by President Kennedy's father and is paid $50,000 in 4 installments to make the wreath at each of the different stages. So Ferrand is a Frenchman who's lived under the shadow of Schlumberger. He's very excited for this. He says in his letters he wants to give back to the nation that gave him so much. So he hires a photographer to take these professional studio pictures of him and the wreath because he finally thinks he's going to get his due. We are so pro Ferrand here because we think this is going to be the masterpiece, and he's going to get out from the shadow of Schlumberger. Still, the reinterment is 2 years away. It takes a long time for these things to happen. The last letter in any archive we can find is Jackie Kennedy Onassis at that point in 1970 writes to Schlumberger and says, "There are complications at Arlington which are difficult to explain, but by fall things will be clearer." So we know in 1970, they were still thinking that this beautiful sculpture is going to get on the grave. And that's what...
Do we have any idea what she meant by fall?
The fall of that year. This was in May in
What might
1970.
happen in the fall that would
We don't know.
impact that?
We've looked at Arlington to try to figure out if there are conflicts. We know that the original grave for the president had to go through 5 commissions, including the Army, for approval. As you can see, if you go to Arlington, it's the second most visited grave to this day after the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. So it's still very popular. They had to get a route around to file the people up to the grave. So this was bigger than most graves that are there. So a lot of people were involved in those decisions. So I'm sure to add something to that probably made it complex.
But how difficult for her to have to convey that word
Yes,
to him that
yes.
pretty much put it to rest.
And in all the letters, Schlumberger says to people, "This is so important to me. You don't understand how important this is to me." He also says in his letter, "I want to give back to the nation who gave me so much." He's a Frenchman who comes in after the war, and he makes his name under the name of Tiffany, but he gets to sign his jewelry, a rare occurrence for Tiffany to have the maker sign the jewelry. And of course, Ferrand is the man making it, but Schlumberger is the man designing it. So we know that the wreath comes here to Oak Spring, and it's set to age, and then it disappears. And we don't know where it went. And for 50 some odd years, we didn't know where it went. But we sort of thought maybe Louis Ferrand is the key to all this. And we went into his archives at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, and we found this letter. And it's a letter from Dave Powers, who was a good friend of President Kennedy and then was a museum curator at the JFK Library. But of course, the library isn't even built yet in 1977. It was commissioned in 64, I.M. but it is not made because of the conflicts in Boston about where it was going to be set. So in 1977, the corporation, the JFK Corporation at the time, writes to Ferrand and says, "We understand you have this wreath. We will pay you $1,500 if you'll ship it to us." They don't have a building. They only have off-site storage. It comes down in 6 crates, and it's filed under the name of Ferrand, Louis Ferrand, sort of an unknown man at the time. And the opening of the museum happens in 1979. The wreath by that time is forgotten, and its significance probably isn't even known to Dave Powers.
What an amazing story. And as we've pieced together the timeline here, it's just continues to be amazing, from Jim Felder's compelling reflections of being there at the funeral, and now what may have been, could have been, but never was.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was now time to see the site where Louis Ferrand once assembled this remarkable sculpture. So Eleanor, here in historic Fletcher Cemetery here on Oak Spring Garden Foundation, this extraordinarily beautiful setting, we've come to a spot that concludes our story today, that brings home the visual of what might have been that never was. Tell us where we are and what this space represents.
So this was a place that Mrs. Mellon made in 1973 to bring that wreath up here to see how it would look on the grave without bringing it down to Arlington. It's in so many pieces. The original letter from Jackie Kennedy to Schlumberger says, we'll put it together in Arlington before it opens or after it opens. And I think when they started to put this thing together, they couldn't do it in an hour and take it down in an hour. So this was a place where they could all view it, look at it, and decide how it was going to look down at Arlington.
So this, in essence, is a memorial to a memorial.
Absolutely.
So tell us about what this represents in this circle.
This is where the eternal flame would be in the center. But Mrs. Mellon, when she makes this, it's made out of oyster stone. It's a very soft stone, so it wasn't for permanence. It was really for this maquette. But she puts this Christian cross in the round stone, so it makes it different than the eternal flame down at Arlington. So this was a practice to put the wreath here to look at it. We know the sculptor comes and works for 3 days to make it on the grave. It was up here to age. It was made out of bronze with various patinas, so it had to look a little older than it did coming right off the shop shelf.
So it stayed here for a while, and then it was intended to go to the gravesite.
Correct.
And why did it not go to the gravesite? Do we know?
We don't know why. We can speculate, but we really don't know why. Was it someone rejected it? One of the participants, maybe Mrs. Kennedy? We understand from Ambassador Caroline Kennedy that her memory was that it was too heavy for the grave and that the Mellons purchased it and gifted it to a museum, which is where we first started looking for it. But in the end, it was President Kennedy's father who paid for the sculpture. And it didn't go to any museum in Virginia. It was actually taken to the JFK Library and Museum in
Where was,
Boston.
in essence, forgotten.
Where it was filed under the sculptor's name. And it was before the library was even built. So it went into storage 2 years before the library even had a structure. So forgotten, maybe unknown, because it was so secretive. Everywhere they went, people wrote their letters in code because they didn't want anyone to know about this. And we think part of that is there were so many critics about the grave that maybe everybody wanted to wait until the last moment to reveal this thing. If art critics and military critics were going to tell them that it was good or bad, they wanted to keep it secret until that time.
Well, the poetry of this site to me is that the caps were laid at the grave site until they deteriorated. And now this is left and it's deteriorating and it will fade away into this historic cemetery. And I'm so grateful to you for sharing this story with us and sharing this very special place with us as part of our story today.
Thank you so much, Stuart.
We have brought you the incredible personal memories of retired Army Sergeant James Felder, who led the honor guard at President Kennedy's burial. And we visited Oak Spring Gardens Foundation, where our friend Eleanor shared how they learned of this remarkable sculpture to honor the president's memory. Well, I'm here now at the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library and Museum, where we're going to see the actual pieces of the sculpture here in person. I'm joined by Director Alan Price, who's a good friend and who's led the library and museum for almost 7 years. Alan is so committed to public service and leading the community partnerships that they have here. And that is quite obvious from the moment you walk into this remarkable IMP designed building at Columbia Point, here along the Dorchester Bay Peninsula. Alan, thank you for having us in this very special place. Every time I come here, it's a reminder of the importance and the iconic presidency of John F. Kennedy and, of course, Mrs. Kennedy, is our founder at the White House Historical Association. Thank you for having us again here today.
Always a pleasure to have you back here, Stuart.
Thank you. Well, nothing is more special to culminate this story than seeing the items that we have in front of us. And they have been here at the library for many, many years. And we see them in pieces and parts that will, when assembled, which I understand takes quite a long time to do, they present a story. And let's talk about that, what we have here in front of us and that story that was intended to be told.
Well, as you can imagine, trying to make arrangements around the assassination and the funeral that followed, to have an artistic vision, this intricate, this detail that takes so many people to assemble, so many puzzle pieces. Each piece, they're cast in bronze with silver and tin, which now you see has a lovely patina over it, is fashioned in such a way that it fits together. This piece goes over this piece, and this piece goes under this piece. Each piece has its individual instructions about how it connects to the next piece. And even with all the instructions and other guidelines, different people have assembled it slightly differently each time. But we think we have a handle on it, but it's so heavy. And it takes 4 people, a tremendous amount of time to put this puzzle together.
So, Alan, how many pieces are in this puzzle?
It's 25 or 26 pieces in total. We have 10 of them here as a representative of the different forms of symbolism.
I understand that this piece here in the front is called Integration, the only piece that actually has a name to it. To me, that's so poignant, representing the different metallurgical elements and the sculpture that is so different from piece to piece. It really, you feel the integration of our nation together in its many differences around what was intended to be around this gravesite.
Yes.
Integration piece.
Integration piece has Ferran's name and the foundry name marked in it, the sculptor. And it is a sort of the capstone piece, if you will.
Speaking of capstone, we have these 6 caps in front of us. This one here is Sergeant Felder's representation of his cap. And having met him and heard his story, it's so powerful to see the actual symbol of his participation in those very challenging days in our nation's history.
Yes, each cap representing each of the military branches. Powerful symbolism.
Another iconic piece is the palm. Tell us about what that symbolizes.
Yes, the palm is suggestive of the South Seas, the area in which PT 109 was engaged.
This piece here,
centerpiece,
the most poignant, I think, of all, would have gone around the actual eternal flame.
Yes.
That would have come out of the center of that.
I love the simplicity of it. The eternal flame surrounded by the branches, the sticks that would be part of a traditional flame. It's really a nice touch.
Multiple pieces.
Yes, interwoven
and connected. And I understand it would take hours if we were actually to assemble it, like a jigsaw puzzle.
It took us days the first time we did it.
Wow. And about 8 feet in
8 feet in diameter.
And so it would have been quite a presence. And you can see from the icons and the imagery of this that it would have been quite a presence. So this is one of those elements of history that wasn't in the form that it was intended. Well, it's from studying history and learning about the presidents and their lives that we gain so much context for those things, people who have gone before in White House history. But there's also some mystery in history as well.
Of course.
This brings with it an element of that mystery.
Yes. In part, the mystery, well, not just the mystery of how it's put together, but the mystery of its journey to where it stands today. I'm glad it has a happy ending. Everybody knows exactly where it is, and it's well preserved for generations to come. But there was a time when some folks wondered where it was.
Yeah.
And I'm glad it's always been in safekeeping here, though it was listed under one name and then when it would have been easier to
Sure.
search finding it under another name.
When we move our homes, things get put in boxes and labeled and mislabeled, and generations come and go. But to have that story come together, to contemplate what we know, Mr. Felder's story, the Oak Spring Garden component of this, the resting place here at the Library and Museum of these elements, the story of the hats and the caps and the design, it reminds us in a powerful way that even though this is not at the gravesite, it gives us stories to tell that remind us of that presidency and the things that represent it. One of the keepers of the flame, another kind of flame, is the family of our presidents.
Sure.
And you're so fortunate here to have the involvement and the leadership of President Kennedy's family.
Yes. And President Kennedy's daughter, Caroline, continues to be involved. This is important to her as well. And one of the many reasons why we're proud to be the stewards of it.
Well, we are indebted to those family members of our presidents and first ladies who are the perpetuation of that family legacy and telling that story. And we're honored and privileged to work with them, as you do and I do, to tell this story to the American people. And I just look forward to this episode of the 1600 Sessions coming out. And I hope it will pique some interest in coming here to the Kennedy Library. And although this is not on display here, there's so much rich, wonderful context in all of the exhibits you have here.
People will come. In some ways, I'm sorry, they won't see this 8-foot diameter sculpture in all its beauty, but people will have access to it online through the photographs. And I think it's wonderful that we can bring this piece of the history and make it accessible to the public.
So thank you for sharing this extraordinary history with us today. And this brings together all that we've talked about at Oak Spring Garden Foundation with Mr. Felder. And to see these pieces together, it's very powerful symbolism of a great president.
Well, for history to come to life, it takes champions like you to put a spotlight on it and make sure that people know.
Well, I appreciate our partnership. It takes all of us, from the Presidential Libraries Coast to Coast, to the White House Historical Association, to those whose interest will be piqued. What I'm excited about is the young mind. Maybe it's 1 or 2 or 3 that will see this and will want to delve more into the Kennedy life and legacy, the presidential history, the White House itself. And the great part about education is we'll never see the full redemption of those seeds we plant and those that we water and try to grow. But I think I know it's been inspiring to me and very powerful for me to experience. And I just thank you so much for sharing this with the 1600 Session followers.
Well, certainly I hope we inspire future historians, future curators, future archivists, future presidents of the United States.
So history has been uncrated and shared here in this form. And thank you so much for sharing it with us.
Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you all for listening and watching today. Be sure to subscribe to the White House 1600 Sessions on your favorite podcast provider so that you never miss an episode, and watch the video version on YouTube and Facebook. Your support of the White House Historical Association makes this work possible. When you become an association member, or when you purchase a book, or even the official White House Christmas ornament, you're helping to fund our education mission through teacher programming, publishing, our White House History Live, in-person and virtual events, and our latest initiative, the People's House, a White House experience. We're bringing the White House and its storied history to life at 1700 Pennsylvania Avenue, and it's open to everyone. So plan your visit today and register for free passes at our website, thepeopleshouse.org. And you can learn more about our work as a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization by going to our website, whitehousehistory.org. Thank you very much.